To understand the DOE, we must first understand its acronyms. If you're a parent and you want to be involved with your child's school, you can join the PTA or the PTSA or the PTO or the TSO or the PTG. But then you have to figure out, where does your child fit in? So if you have a child who's smart, they can be tested and accepted into a GT program. And if your child doesn't speak English, they'll be labeled either ESL or ELL or LEP or LES, with the goal of being an FES, which is a fluent English speaker. And they actually have a category for that. If you have a child who's a slow learner, the child will be labeled ODD, LDD, LD, DD, MR, ADHD /ADD, whichever, OCD, ED, or maybe the school will even find that your child has PTSD or CAPD. To determine which labels will follow your child for life, you'll have to meet with an SSC to schedule an SST meeting for an evaluation that will determine the DSM-IV diagnosis for your child. And then the school will write up an IEP based on LRE, which is least restrictive environment, as dictated by the IDEA, which is a federal law. Your IEP team will consist of an SSC, an EO, a CAS, a teacher, an SBBH, other SBBH personnel. And then your child may receive an MH or an MP or an FBA to get an FBP. An IEP might include an OT or a PT or an SLP, and if they're really lucky, they're going to get ESY or a BPSR, Biopsychosocial Rehab Program. They don't get that anymore, really, but they used to give that. And then, so the purpose of the IEP is to meet the federal compliance and not necessarily to provide meaningful services, because the IEPs are boilerplate, and sometimes they even contain the wrong student's name on the IEP. It's an individual plan for Aaron, but the kid's name is Adrian, so you kind of don't take it real seriously. But the DOE is taking millions of dollars from the federal special education funding, but they don't have the methodologies that would allow kids that really do have learning differences to progress, like if they have autism or dyslexia or whatever. They don't use the best practices in those fields. You may find that your children are not working with qualified personnel either. They might be your autism specialist, maybe last year's crossing guard or a cafeteria worker, but now is your child's EA, which is an educational assistant. But your IEP and your other educational records are protected by FERPA, which is kind of like HIPAA, but for education. Some administrators oppose parents who want to see their child's records, claiming privacy under FERPA, even though it's your own child. The purpose of this is so your child will be able to take the HAS, which is the Hawaii State Assessment, to demonstrate that he is learning the HICCUPS 3. The HICCUPS 3 is the Hawaii Content and Performance Standards, revised 3 times, of course. NCLB is the reason that the students must take the HSA. The ESA was reauthorized in 2001, is now called NCLB. NCLB requires that all children perform at grade level in English and math by the year 2014. The trouble with this idea is that all the students in school in 2001, when the law, became in effect, or how you want to say it, they'll be long gone by 2014. They'll be out of the school system, right? But then there's this problem of all these new, non-educated kids that keep coming into the school system. And the administration like, darn those kids. Why are they coming to school before they're educated? It's making us look bad. And some of the legislators that we love have said that. But never fear, the DOE has an SIP, a state improvement plan, and a CSSS, which is a comprehensive student support system to make sure that all children learn how to read and how to do math by the year 2014. It will only cost you $2.5 billion a year, or $15,000 per student. It's such a deal. NCLB requires the states to design their own plan, contrary to what you've heard, No Child Left Behind lets each state do their own thing. And their measurements to show AYP, which is adequate yearly progress, towards this proficient goal. Schools don't show improvement. If they don't show improvement, then they're given like 5 years to show improvement. And then after 5 years, then they said, oh, you're gonna get taken over by the DOE if you don't, comply. Well, the DOE already runs every school in the state, so it's really not that big of a deal. It's like, oh, you're gonna, because the NCLB doesn't override collective bargaining agreements, so there's nothing they can do anyway, because we all know the unions run the school. And initially when the DOE accepted NCLB, because to get the Title I funding, they have to agree that they'll do what the federal government says, which is measure performance. But the DOE at the time they took the funding, their long-term vision for 2014, as stated on their website, was to have all of the schools failing by 2014. Failing. The opposite of the intent of the law. Their vision was to have, quote, all teachers engaged in workshops where they would teach each other while students would be engaged in self-learning. So they could all just keep on getting educated, and the kids would be off doing their thing.
They could do that without the school, right?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect situation. But the reason that the DOE's goal is to have all the schools in failing status was that each time under their own plan, if the school is failing, they get to form what's called a critical ally team, and the critical ally team is sent into that school to help them perform, improve and bring these kids up to par. But then each one of those new administrative positions are paid at a higher rate than what the people would make in the school, and they get to run around and not be in classrooms and make things better. The only problem is like, for instance, in Hana, Maui, the principal basically got run out of town by the community. She was so bad, and parents just said, we can't take this anymore, we got to get this person out. So she got, you don't get fired, reassigned.
To what?
Reassigned to a critical ally team in charge of Hana School. So she came back in to get higher pay to fix Hana's school that she messed up.
All right.
So
that is a conspiracy, huh?
So it's like the parents, I think, gave up at that point. And then, so the more schools fail and the more children have special needs or they're considered high poverty, and every year you'll notice on the DOE's graph that group of children grows and grows and grows. Pretty soon we've got now 51 or 2% that are special needs or high needs children in our school system. The more funding the DOE can receive, they get the Title I funding, they get the lunch money, they get all kinds of little benefits for that. And of course they get all the different state and district personnel that have to help the poor children, So then they hire more and more people, and each one of those people pay dues to a local union, HSTA, HDEA. The principals are a union also. UPW is all the workers, the custodians, etc. at the school. Anyway, those people then they pay their mandatory dues to the local politicians, and then the local politicians that perpetrate the system keep getting reelected, so nothing ever really changes. Now the status quo means for our schools is that the union contracts, which I just got a couple, the new ones I think, the teachers are only allowed to instruct the students for 1,400 minutes a week.
1,400 minutes.
1,400 minutes per week, 4.5 hours a day.
That's all a day.
That's by their contract. So every other minute of their day is structured to, like they said, you could spend so much time passing time, that's in the contract, so much time going to the bathroom, so much time having lunch, whatever. And so it's
It
really...
actually says in the contract Passing
time. It's in the contract. I brought it. So if you guys don't believe me, I brought them. I had an older one. I just went downtown and got a newer one. And so anyway, that's why this whole issue with the furloughs came up. And they said that they were going to have to do away with the, Friday to save $5 million a day. So in response, about 100 schools went down to the board and they said, we'll change our minutes. We'll just take our minutes and shift them over to Monday through Thursday, or we'll change the bell schedule. But then another 150 schools the principals, a lot of them were saying, we're not doing that. They like their long weekend, they're not going to do that. So the process for them to change is called an exception to the contract. And the teachers, supposedly the teachers have to agree at first. Then it goes to the school community council, and they have to decide. And then if they apply for the exception, it goes up to this exception review committee, which is, they call it a 2+2 committee. It's 2 board members and 2 union members on each committee, like HSTA or HGEA. And they have to approve the exception that's done at the community level. And if it doesn't go through the union's approval, then, and they almost have never, agreed to any changes, the BOE, it goes to the Board of Education, and then they usually go along with the unions and say,
By that time is the end of the school year.
Right, exactly. It's a long process. And so it's kind of sad because, we're supposed to have this community council process where if all the stakeholders agree, then you can run your own school, but it doesn't really work like that. So anyway, about 150 schools kind of didn't get on the ball and get this thing approved yet, and the other 100 did. And now Hawaii's school year is 161 days per year, 4.5 hours a day. I don't know what they plug in all the rest of the day, because the kids are there for 6 hours, so I guess lunch, and then there's DARE or whatever programs they plug in there. So anyway, the parents are protesting, and you've seen them with the signs, but what they should be concerned is, what are the children learning on the other 4 days of the week? The DOE has no standardized curriculum. They don't have a standardized grading scale. They have performance standards, what the kids should in general be able to do at each grade level, or maybe K through 3 or big grouped, but they don't actually have a content, like a curriculum that they can use to measure, is the child learning this skill set or whatever. And so basically they're creating at the state level a test, but they don't know what the kids are learning in the classroom. The teachers now finally have to make lesson plans. They never had to before, but their contract requires them to have lesson plans, but they don't have to show them to anybody.
And they don't have to follow them.
They don't have to follow them either, I guess. They have to make them up and put them in the cupboard. And now the schools, many of the schools have done away with grades. They don't have grades anymore. A, B, C, D, E, F, none of that stuff.
What?
No. A lot of them don't have grades anymore.
Because it's bad for self-esteem or something?
It doesn't. They have below proficiency, meeting proficiency, proficiency, and exceeding proficiency. So this is based on subjective evaluations by the teachers or teacher groups that get together and decide, is this kid meeting,
That's across
their standards.
The whole district?
Pretty much. The high schools still have grades, unless I think maybe some charter schools don't, but the high schools, because they have to use them to go to college, I don't think they've figured out how to do away with them yet.
I met proficiency.
And the report card, they assigned this one guy who's had every name and position in the DOE. He's been the Felix coordinator and the head of the government, whatever, state improvement plans and all this. So then he's the one who was put in charge of changing the report cards so that you can't really tell if your child's learning or not.
But one of them was meeting proficiency, and the next one is proficiency.
One of them is approaching proficiency.
What
And all you're trying to do is get them to grade level. It's not really rocket science here. So the DOE paid Harcourt, which I think you know from the textbooks, $7 million to develop the test that's going to measure. That doesn't measure what's being taught because nobody knows, right? So but I gotta read this one because this is one of the ones this is an article that I wrote. It's called Fuzzy Math, and is the DOE's $7 million annual assessment test too difficult, or is it just screwed up? And remember when the governor was saying, oh, the reason our children aren't doing well on the test is it's too hard. It's just too hard.
Was it Cayetano or Lingo?
It was lingual, and she said it was just too hard. So all of a sudden, everybody's, had a collective sigh of relief because they're like, oh, good, we're not going to be held accountable for this. So I got a copy of the Hawaii State Assessment booklet, and it basically has some different questions on it. So I want to ask you one of the questions they have for the 6th graders and see if you got the answer, okay?
Are you smarter than a 5th grader?
And it's culturally competent, so that you got it because it's got all kinds of local things in it. Okay, Lonnie wants to buy Kona coffee to send to her family on the mainland. The coffee is priced at $7 per pound, including tax. That'll never happen. If Lonnie has $100, what is the greatest number of pounds of coffee she can buy?
None.
Okay.
Kona coffee's $100.
Is it 10% or is it real? Let's see. So write your answer in the response booklet and show or explain how you found the answer. Now this is, you don't have to answer it. I'm not going to strain your brains. But the average 6th grader should usually be able to divide 100 by 7, right? And get the answer. $2 left. Okay, we can do that. And then, but that is not the correct answer.
Because the kid drank the coffee.
What?
Not the correct answer. Nope. Because the student has to show how the answer is derived. You can't just go 100, 7. That won't fly. Okay, so what the student, to get the highest answer, must subtract 7 from 100 14 times.
Because that's the way we all do it, right?
So the parents respond, of course, we all stand at the cash register going, and the cashier is going, does she have an aide? The aide is your crossing guard, so you don't know if, that's not going to help either. So, so the parents say, well, now can you imagine the students trying to take this Hawaii State assessment, and they're trying to complete this task 40 questions during a timed test? So obviously they're not going to finish the test, so their scores aren't going to be that great. The content standard and benchmark measured by this question is the student's understanding of the meaning of operations and how they relate to each other, and to describe situations when addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division of integers, rationals, and numbers involving whole number, non-negative exponents are appropriate. Now this is standard. That's the standard they're trying to reach by getting the 6th grader to do long division, right? Simple division. So when asked why the DOE gives high scores to students who use primitive methods in lieu of established algorithms that took mankind several millennia to develop and discover, a curriculum specialist at the DOE Office of Curriculum, he's gone now, blamed Hawaii's business leaders, saying the business community imposed it on us. What? I don't make this up. I write this down when they tell me this stuff. The specialists claim that the business community did not want workers who'd only been taught through rote learning because they can't read materials required at their jobs when they enter the working world. So the DOE says that the students must develop their own methods to arrive at the correct solution. They don't want them just to learn it, they want them to figure it out. This was Pat Hamamoto in her 2005-2008 strategic plan said, rather than imparting knowledge, teachers now coach the students to search, discover, evaluate, and conclude. So they don't want to teach you the actual, division, multiplication. And it is really true because Greg Knutson, who used to be the communications director for the DOE, told me they did not believe that for children to do higher math, they do not need to know how to learn how to subtract and add and multiply and divide. And that's a quote. That's a quote.
Okay. For credit cards.
So the superintendent, during the recent appearance on a television news program, announced that she is waiting, quote, waiting for students to discover that a circle is a circle and a ball is a ball. Instead,
We have to just rediscover the wheel. Right?
this is on the website, a quote for Pat. I put it up on the famous quotes. So if you look at Pat Hamamoto, it should still be in there. Sorry, Pat. I'm sorry. Instead of providing direct instruction, parents ask if this is what has left Hawaii student performance at the bottom of the barrel nationally. Let's see if any of this other stuff is interesting. Let's see. Some of this is a little dry, okay. Here's the part that I kind of think is important to this group because process takes precedence over results. The DOE further complicates the testing process by using a relativist approach to scoring. Students are allowed to use any process they devise to arrive at an answer and that was that the same question? Yeah. The highest score must include the explanation of the process. The open-ended questions can be scored from 0 to 4. A sixth grade math test would include 40 questions with 72 maximum points possible. In order to achieve proficiency, like on your report card, you get that E, the student must answer 70% of those questions, or at least 28 out of 40 questions to be proficient. You've got to get 28 out of 40. Okay. So the process that requires the student to score 70%, let's see, so the focus for the DOE is on the process and not actually the answer. They're more concerned with the process that is actually what they're doing is they're making bureaucrats that can later get hired by the DOE, because this is my thought, because it doesn't matter if you ever get to the final goal, the final answer. All that matters is you just keep doing things. You keep working at things until, and you're going to get credit for it. So to me, it's like the perfect bureaucrat. So the scary part is the DOE didn't make this test up by themselves, and they had hired this national company that writes a lot of our textbooks, Harcourt, and it's sort of a relativistic approach to learning and the assessment and the scoring, and it's not just that illiteracy is here in Hawaii, it's everywhere in the country because they're using these approaches all through the country. 20% of U.S. college students with bachelor's degrees in the U.S. cannot even calculate the cost of ordering office supplies or gas they need to get to the next gas station. Finally, in California, they replaced the fuzzy math with sequential standards to get the students to an advanced level of mathematics. Here, we're left with children counting on their fingers, hoping to arrive at that aha moment. And then when I asked the DOE curriculum specialist why he's, I said, why don't you use methodologies that work? He said, well, that's why you have your child in private school. That's what he said.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, isn't that terrible?
Wait a minute. So they acknowledge that
They acknowledge it.
don't use it.
Yeah,
So-
and even their communications
You're
person
kind
said
of
they
proud
don't.
of it, huh?
Children don't need to have basic math to perform higher math.
They're children. They're children.
Their children
They
too.
don't- That's
Your
the
children.
village elders that are teaching our kids.
I hope that wasn't too dry, but I thought it was kind of appropriate.
If you can figure out how much it would cost to publish this presentation, and we should all chip in and help you publish it.
Yeah.
We really should.
I know.
And then you put a
You know what I
picture of Will
wanted to
Rogers
do?
on the cover, so we'll all get it before we ever.
What do you
flip
think
it.
about it as a comic book?
Well, it could be just in the narrative form that it is. I mean, and you've got a videotape tonight of what you said. That's
It's a
attached to
graphic
what-
novel. There's nothing funny about it.
I know it's all funny, but people absorb information better through comics. I
It's a
think.
graphic novel.
But I'll make sure that the military kids coming to Hawaii, or parents of military kids coming to Hawaii get to see this.
Oh, there's a lot worse than
Before they
this.
show
But
up.
I just pulled out what I could. And,
Because parents are,
You know.
are opting out to go to Hawaii because they know their kids
They
are going to be
aren't.
about 3
They
years
won't come
behind
here.
after 3 years
I
in
know.
Hawaii. They don't want them to go to school.
It's
here.
true. I just heard that from someone in Washington that does this, is the education point person there for the military, and she said they cannot get people to come here. They just don't want to deal with it. So the DOE keeps saying, that their score, the children's scores are rising. But they're not, because the NAEP is the national test that basically isn't changing, but the DOE has to show improvement. They just spent $7 million for a new test. They've got to do something. But so we're still down there with Mississippi and Louisiana, pretty much. We're always pretty much at the bottom. About 12% of our public school graduates go on to get a higher degree, any kind, community college, anything, within the 6 years. What's so ironic is that the GED and vocational ed programs are mandatory in prison here. So that the children, I asked the Department of Public Safety a few years back, I said, what's the average reading level of your prisoners? And he said 3rd grade, because they all have to be tested when they come in, but they actually have mandatory education there to get them up to speed. And so about a fifth of our population is functionally illiterate. But I also, am an advocate for enough schools for the kids when they build these new subdivisions. And in Mililani, they overcrowded, and they got, they put kids in multi-track school. And so that's how I got active in the DOE in the beginning. And I went in on the Coa Ridge subdivision, which is over near Costco, and I looked at the plans, and what happened is that they'd eliminated one step in the whole sequential process from K to 12. They had elementary school, they had a middle school, and then they had the prison. And I went to the Board of Education, I said, are you guys trying to save money? Because there's no high school here. So what? Most of these kids end up in prison anyway, and they got to get educated over there, shift the budget to the public safety department. But yeah, they completely left out the high school. So I just thought it was sort of, and they all, of course, gave the deer in the headlight response, but I just thought, come on now, or they really don't think that 7,500 new homes might need a high school? And then the DOE had come up with this smaller school policy, and the DOE thought they meant build smaller schools, and the whole idea was you have less children in a classroom. But the DOE thought you just made the school really tiny. So they did. They did it. And so they ended up really overcrowded and not having enough classroom. So then the developer didn't have to give them as much land, right? Because they could put in a really small place. And I actually had to testify for 2 years on that. I said smaller schools doesn't mean, and they're like, really? And so so the developer felt bad, so he gave them some money so they could buy portables, so they could actually have more classrooms. But I just think that actually, all in all, it's so nonsensical. If you go, I could go on for days, but it really is the department, instead of Department of Education, it's Department of Employment. There's 88,000 people on the payroll.
Good heavens.
And there's 170,000 kids.
Right.
They're not FTEs necessarily.
There's one
They're-
employee for every 2 students.
Yes.
Oh my God.
And they keep all of the personnel information on 3x5 cards in the Office of Personnel or whatever. They don't have it supposedly automated, so you don't know who's on the payroll. So I found several politicians on the payroll and looking through certain
Really?
things. But yeah, it's really interesting. So I think that right now we're trying to get some information. We can put up a transparency website where we can actually, all of you can go in and search, find interesting information, and we could probably write about it for the rest of our lives. But it's a scary system, and someone just told me right as I was coming over here that the governor just agreed to give the DOE $50 million out of the rainy day fund to cancel the furlough days. So she gave in without us knowing what the money's going for. So for now, I guess it's okay. The kids will be in school, but we're gonna have to figure it out, so that, because every year they're gonna come back again and again and again. $2.5 billion a year already, not including their CIP budget.
Bradford High School is having a work community meeting on the 17th, and the topic will be education.
Good.
So I don't know if you want to be there and monitor or not. I plan to be there if I can. I'm traveling again, and everything just kind of piles up.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. It is funny, but it's not funny, and that's why I got involved. I was just a mom that started finding things out, and then I had kids with special needs and found out about that whole thing, and every time you turn over a rock, you'd find all this other stuff, and Malia finally of Hawaii Reporting finally said, you just need to write about it. You just need to start writing, and so I did.
You're doing things for Grassroots Institute too? What is it?
We're doing the Transparency Project, which is all state government. So I did a request, a Freedom of Information request to Russ Saito, who's our controller at DAGS. And it was amazing. He's actually pretty good. He downloaded all the state's expenditures on a couple of discs and mailed them to me. And we have someone who's going to put it up on a website.
Wow.
So there's really, I started scanning through, and I found some cool things like the Institute for Mind-Body Massage and things like that we're spending taxpayer dollars on. I was like, oh, I want to see who's getting the massages. So there's like a few hundred pages. So I think, we're going to need a forensic SWAT team, volunteer army to come in, and could you help look through page 1 through 10 or 11 through 20 and see what's up there. But and what we're going to do is actually tie it to the program, so we know, like remember the DOE sent all their administrators to Disneyland, $2 million last year, and the governor got upset because they were asking for more money. And they said it was a model schools conference or something like that.
We could learn a lot from Mickey Mouse.
And they got $2 million to go to Disneyland.
Goofy.
And you know what? They've done it every year. Every year. That was just the first year anybody noticed.
Well,
So-
how come the other newspapers or nobody is investigating this? I mean, except for Hawaii Reporter and Grassroots.
I
How come
think
it's
that
not been done before?
I think the state of journalism is pretty bad right now. I do think that there is a lot to do with advertising, and Jay can tell you, it's they get a lot of money from different groups that they're not going to they're going to avoid making people angry. And I think that, and Jay knows a lot of the people in the reporting field, but most of them aren't really investigative journalists.
No, they can't. they keep it down. You know, the banks get the most money from the government, run it through, and they control a lot of the media.
And that's why Hawaii Reporter started.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to worry about that, you know, because all our friends advertise and, you know, good people that aren't going to be intimidated.
And tell us to
Okay, let's open up to questions. What sort of thoughts or comments do you have on
This 1,400 minute per week thing, how does that compare to school districts on the mainland, or?
I haven't looked at their contracts, but generally the work days are usually about 7 hours a day, and it could be comparable to the other districts. It seems that when you have any kind of union initiative, it's coming from NEA, you know, down through HSTA and all the local. So a lot of what they come up with seems to be already predetermined. The point is to trade off the teacher's salary with rights that they can have. Let's say, okay, you only have to work 4.5 hours a day, but we're not going to raise your salary. So the teachers aren't making any more than when they were actually unionized in the early 70s here. They're actually making less in today's dollars than they would have if they hadn't had a union. They might have actually done better on their own. But what the charter schools are doing now is they are able, they're the managing agent. They negotiate the contract with their own workers, so they don't have to go by the Board of Education's contract. So this contract isn't good for the charter schools. They've got their own deal. So what they've done is they actually pay the teachers, don't quote me at every school, but you know, some of the charter schools pay more for their teachers, and they actually, the teachers don't mind working overtime because that's their love, that's their profession.
Can I clarify? The 1,400 minutes is per teacher, not per student, so that if you've got,
Right.
that's maybe your main teacher you have is 1,400, but the student might have additional instruction from a gym teacher or an art teacher who has their 1,400 hours but sees a different, you know, cohort of
Right.
students.
So, you know, it would seem like they could have moved the minutes around pretty easily if they wanted 4-day school weeks.
when they're taking into consideration the cost per student, that's just the operating budget. This doesn't take into account the expense of the land, you know, like
Right.
if you were a private school, you'd also have a pension budget, you'd also have the expenses
Right.
of your land, everything else. Has there ever been a calculation
Yes.
of what all of that would be if it was
Yes.
a private school?
Well, it's, if you consider everything, and actually Randy Roth just wrote something really great on this. It's $15,500 per student. He figured in all the costs. The DOE will say more like about 12,000, but they don't include CIP or debt, and what they've got is about $700 million in the budget is for pensions, health, you know, all the benefits, debt service. So you could say, okay, they've got an allocation of 2.5 billion and take 700 million off the top of that. So their operating budget is more like 1.8. Without CIP is their building schools. That's about, I think it's a couple $100 million a year, something like that, in addition to those numbers. But they don't really tell you that there's all kinds of costs other agencies have been absorbing. So when the Governor Lingle went in, and Bruce Cooper, and that Dr. Ouchi, and they figured out the per student, and they went in and they did as much as they could because the DOE kept giving them different numbers every day. Their numbers are changing. But to get the federal money, they have to tell them not only what the ADA is actually based on how many the average of, you know, students who actually show up is the ADA, and then also, you know, the enrollment. I don't understand. I kind of want to look into why the DOE was, when I moved here, it was like 190,000 kids. Now it's down to 170,000 kids. And I'm like, where did they go? They just like that, they're gone. And the population's increased a couple hundred. We've gone from what, like, you know, to 1.2 or 3 million. So I'm thinking there should be more kids out there. And they never include homeschoolers. I know there's at least 10,000 homeschoolers. That's all the DOE will admit to, because they actually have forms for them that they filled out. And there's about, I guess, 17% of the kids are private school. So there's some kids missing in their equation, and I don't know where they are.
So 10% of our kids are private school.
17%.
17%.
17%.
Okay. The 15.5 you quoted is equivalent to what Iolani charges tuition for its students.
Right.
So apparently, you know, like they say, like the DOE told you, that's why you send your kids to private school for the same amount of money. But
Right.
you have to cough up out of your pocket.
I have to pick. Oh, what was that?
You get good results.
Okay, we're gonna get rid of these.
That's a trap, man.
Well, that's not a
That's
Oh, the
a
bench.
seat. Yeah.
Hey, welcome, John. Party crasher.
Yeah, John, just over here, John.
I had to like to look at all the stuff today.
Actually,
and I was
last
thinking,
time
what am I
somebody
gonna
said on
say?
and broke it. We should cut through another way. John, come here.
So you're gonna try to publish this.
And I got the,
My name is John Carroll. I'm running for governor.
Are you gonna try?
you know, actually,
Are you gonna
go
try to
back
publish
through
this?
all of the grassroots articles and all of the.
You're gonna try to publish this presentation in a booklet form?
I should.
I think you should.
If you go back to grassrootinstitute.org and go to the old, it's called older material, and you click on it, and it's all the articles that I'd written for them, and then go to Hawaii Reporter and go to Education Beat on the link on the side and go back, and all the archives are in there. Some of the, I was rereading some of the things that I wrote, and I couldn't even believe it
This is
myself.
so interesting.
I was just like, we need to do a follow-up on all this
Right.
stuff.
Well, just like I'm a member of the Fleet Reserve Association, and our focus is on representing the interests of sea service personnel in Congress, etc. But we could just as easily have a connection. Anybody coming from Norfolk, Virginia to Honolulu that's got kids, write us. We'll tell you all about Hawaii
I know.
education. We got this wonderful booklet. And they're going to say, I don't want to go there.
Hey, you're a published author, you do it.
I don't want to go there, but maybe, well, maybe you can tell them what it'll cost
I
to
know.
put that booklet out. And, you
Well,
know,
we tried to start a charter school for military
Did you?
kids, and I applied through the DOE. They actually had Prel look at our application, and the response was, you're too Western. Your approach to education's too Western. Western
so where are they going to
civilization.
go when they leave here after 3 years? They're
Well,
going to
that's
go
what I
back
was
to the
thinking
Western
is-
Let me
world.
tell you, you won't get support from the military because we briefed the SYNC
Uh-huh.
3 different times and his staff in each service, and they turned it down, primarily because of the Army.
The Army doesn't want to do it.
Well, they're afraid of Illinois, and they're afraid of the politicians.
And they said, well, we support the public schools, and I said, charter schools are public schools. And then they don't know what to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Well, the Royal Hawaiians, they can run the Army out of here anytime they want to. They just got to stay connected with the environmentalists and the 25th idea, go back to Washington. And then they can start their Hawaiian nation right
That's a
up
whole
there.
nother,
at State
I think
Reserve.
that's a whole nother session.
Yeah.
Wow.
Good point.
I mean, that's a scenario that you probably never thought to publish that in Hawaii.
No, never thought of it.
Because,
But I just got a little frustrated because I thought, I've been doing this since 2002,
oh, it's too long.
and I've been writing, researching, writing, and then nothing's changing. It keeps getting worse. And so I started to give up, you know, and think, wow, is it ever going to change? Is it ever going to get better?
Sure it will.
And, you know, at a certain point you think there has to be critical mass of all of us that,
I can see an audience of 100 people, 200 people, senior citizens, or retired military, over 40, watching your presentation on a 65-inch screen.
wow.
I mean,
And you know what breaks my heart? Because I would go to community meetings, and I went to Laupahoehoe, I can't say it, on the Big Island, and I'd just come from a Board of Education meeting over at the Hilton Waikoloa, and they're having their lobster, and they're doing their thing, and you know, talking about, wow, what should we talk about this year? And then I went over to this community meeting, and these people that, if you've ever been to that community, it's a K-12 school, and they're very kind of isolated, you know, where you wouldn't be able to transport your kids in and out of there very easily. So they don't have any other choices. And they were so heartbroken that their 15-year-olds couldn't pass their driving test because they couldn't read well enough to pass their test.
Couldn't read the test.
They couldn't figure out how to even use a ruler. And they said, what happened? Because we all came up through this school and we were fine and we can function in the real world. And they were crying, you know. And Dwight Takamine is their legislator, and he's like, oh, don't worry, you know, we'll all do field trips and be happy. And, you know, we'll take care of it. I'll get you guys more money or whatever. But, you know, the thing is they weren't being taught. So there's a really incredible group of people over there that they've taken an interest in the school, and they've gotten the school wired, you know, all Wi-Fi'd, and they've got, you know, University of Hilo helping them, and they're trying to turn it into a charter school right now.
Is it La Pahoy? What are you talking about? Is it a charter school?
They're applying. They just were one of 11 that won a charter school grant, federal charter school grant.
You know if Susie Andrade teaches in there?
No, I don't know.
Well, there's one. I happen to live right in the next place over. I live in and so I'm familiar with the school community-based management councils that they were trying to set up. But she left Waimea Elementary and went to the charter school that I thought it was in Honokaa. Maybe it's over in. Do they have one in Honokaa? You know?
There are a couple of good ones on the Big Island, and I'm not sure.
Honokaa is, you know, down the road from La Pahoy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Can I ask a question? Did they give you any administrative, is there any administrative process to follow after they turn you down on one of those?
There's, according to the expert that I talked to in Washington, she said that they do need to actually tell you how to appeal your denial and what you're supposed to do. But our 92F law is not very good. 92F, there's a lot of loopholes in it. They said they don't have to, they didn't give me a lot of agencies because they couldn't produce it in the format I'd requested, which was Excel, you know, database, whatever, you know, simple database format, you know, but they said, no, you can't. And then the other one was, we can't reveal, this was one Malia got, we can't reveal that correspondence because it would frustrate a legitimate function of government. And I was saying, but you're frustrating a legitimate function of the public by not giving us this, you know, and it was something ridiculous. It was like a memo from Barry Fukunaga to the city on the rail, EIS on the rail. It was something that should be just generic, you know, and they couldn't reveal it.
What do they call it? A readily accessible format?
Yeah, mine was readily accessible format.
Yeah, they can't, because she was asking her for electronic.
Like just a data, you know, a query. They query their system, their
Well, your letter, I think most of them couldn't have read your letter, your request, because it was really like high tech, you know. You confused them.
Yeah, maybe.
You frustrated them.
Well, no, because our accountant went down and found out they do everything manually. So what we're trying to do is bring in
8,000 people.
Yeah,
all
and
pushing pencils.
so we're trying to, you know, in business they have these standard practices, things like cost allocation methodology and management reporting and all these things. So what you want to do is, if you're spending money on, let's say, pregnant teen program, and you've been dumping millions of dollars into that program for years, you want to see if you're actually getting any results. Are you getting more pregnant teens? Are you getting less? Are you, you know, is the money effective? But there's no capability in the DOE to do that. The accounting office doesn't talk to the budget office. So every year you'll have the budget office saying, we're $40 million short, we're $100 million short, and you'll go look at the accounting, the expenditures, and they've got money left over. So last year they had $200 million left over. So, but they were asking for emergency appropriations. So I asked the CFO, well, because he sent me the general ledger, and so I was looking at it, and they said, well, okay, these are unencumbered funds. blah, 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 this many calls, you've got 200 million left over. And he said, you can't just add up what you have left over at the end of the year and say that's the money you have.
100 minus 7 minus 7.
I was like, why not? And I ask again, you know, well, why? Is it encumbered? No. Well, then why can't you do that? And he said, well, we got to pay off stuff for next year. And I said, wouldn't that be in next year's budget? And he was like, wow, I didn't think of that. So we want to know where the $200 million goes at the end of the year. It's
The unions?
not. Somebody's getting big contracts. They said, that's what he said, we're writing contracts. Who's getting the contract? So we don't know. And it's not reflected. They start at zero every year, right?
Yeah.
So they don't, where is that money? It goes somewhere.
Well, I can tell you one thing that the university has done. They send it all up to Guam.
Oh.
It stays out there till they get their new allocation. Then they bring it back.
No way.
Oh, yes, they do.
Okay, I'm on the trail.
There you go.
That's a good one. Wow. Well, I'd heard about offshore money before, but I never got into that because that's a little scary, you know.
Laura, okay, you know how this works. When a parent wants to send their child to a private school, there is a means for the public school to pay for that, right?
Right.
But they all have to be, it has to be determined that that child qualifies, right?
Right.
To go. I collect records at the U.S. Circuit, civil records U.S. District Court every week, and there are tons of lawsuits where parents are suing the Department of Education
Yes.
because they say that child shouldn't go to a private school and that they're being well cared for.
I was one of those parents.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, how much do we spend on money
Legal?
for the attorneys? For that?
They
could be
just
educating
found
attorneys.
a lot of that money in the autism program. They hide it in there's legal expenses in the
Yeah,
autism
seriously.
program.
It's like every
And
week.
that's the sacred cow in the DOE. You can't touch EDN 150, which is where all the central administrators are for the Felix consent decree, which is mental health and things like that. So, but that's where we've got all these other accountants that have, you know, started looking at these figures and they're saying, wait a minute, why are the legal expenses stuck in there in that program? And the federal government, you can't use federal funding for lawsuits for special ed, but they found they were doing that. And it's you know, people, they try to say, well, people are bad that are going to sue, you know, to get their kids a proper education. But after having gone through it with a child of mine, you know, that was just ready, he was like almost suicidal by the time he was in 5th grade. I just went through the process, gave them my notice, put them in asset school for gifted dyslexic kids, went to due process. The judge looked at it and said, okay, and they paid for his tuition. And that's usually not the case. It's a big fight usually. But they had so neglected my son that there was no defense. So I waited a long time because I believed that, you know, could work with the system, or I could drive them crazy and get what I wanted. But, you know, ultimately you got to save your kid, whatever you do. And he's a senior in college now, so it worked, you know. But I couldn't have left. It's like it was like the Titanic, the DOE. You gotta like. And I went back in after I got my kid out. It's like, save the next one, save the next one. As many people, boy, Assets loves me. I probably got a lot of kids in there, but you gotta find. I mean, my daughter went through all public schools. She was pretty bright, you know, but she's smart. She survived. It's not like you're gonna die going through them. You know, if you're normal, you don't have learning disabilities, you probably can make it in the public school system because you're self-motivated. If you're not self-motivated, you're on your own, pretty much.
Well, you're not going to make it. You're not just on your own. You're not going to make it. You won't be able to read your driver's license.
I know. Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, they got to teach you something.
You say you'll make it. It sounds like, well, you survive, but here's the potential, and then,
Right.
you know, is there
Yeah.
a potential loss?
Yeah, I think so, because I think, you know, just in my own experience, and Elaine, you know, Kate, I mean, she was 148 IQ. She is a brilliant kid. She started out brilliant, let's say. And then she went to the DOE, and she was still brilliant all the way through elementary school. And she got into middle school, or it was called junior high school at the time still. And the principal took away the gifted talented program, took away all the curriculum that would really, you know, like what I had experienced growing up. And it was all about exploratory wheel, and we want the children to be happy and find themselves. And so they were partying like crazy. And the next thing you know, and that's when the internet came up, you know, with the chat. And my daughter got into 9th grade at Mililani High School, and she was typing her English papers with the word you, she'd put you. And she came home with an F, and she's like, what? And she just couldn't believe it. And I said, you have to write the whole word. Oh, really? And then she started getting A's, and she was doing good. But, you know, you just think, look at that girl. If I had put her in a school like Punahou, I think she just would have been like your daughter, you know. So, but she's great, you know, she's fine. She's really, yeah, she's going to be all right. But I know, I kind of regret that.
Laura, I think that part of the problem is that most people who are of our generation who went to public school and remember our education don't realize just how far downhill the schools are. So we're thinking, oh, we went to public school, we're probably going to be fine.
Right.
And we just don't understand the things like you explained, where they're not giving grades and they're not teaching you how to do division and all these ridiculous things. I mean, the model for teaching children elementary school has existed for 4,000 years. It's not that complicated. And we have a school system here in Hawaii where it seems like they've managed to screw it up. It's unbelievable.
They want them to rediscover zero, you know? And you know what I mean? It's crazy because I don't know if you guys know Guy Ontai. He was a state representative for Mililani, and he was an MIT professor. He was a professor at Kamehameha Schools. Went to MIT, West Point grad, you know, really smart guy, taught advanced physics at Kamehameha Schools. And his son came home from Mililani Middle School with a math problem. And we were doing a campaign meeting. All of us were sitting at the table in his garage, and we're trying to figure out the answer to the math problem. And Guy, advanced physics, you know, teacher, it took us an hour, a table of 10 adults. And we finally told the poor little guy, you know, 8th grader, we said, we can't figure this out. We don't know, there is no answer. So he went back to school the next day, and he came home that next night, and we said, so, you know, Garrick, what was the answer to that math problem? He said, well, my teacher said there was no answer.
There was no answer.
They just wanted us to try to find, just to see what we would do with it. So everybody was in tears at the end of the night, exhausted.
You were right, there was no answer.
There was no answer.
Well, you guys all get A's. Oh no, you're more, what is it?
No more
Meeting proficiency.
Yeah, you're
Exceeding.
exceeding proficiency.
You know, I heard one time that the state legislators and the public school teachers do have a record that's highest in the country. They send their own children to private schools at a greater rate than any other state. Is that true?
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. They did. There was a study on that one at one point. It was most of them. I don't know what the percentage
So
is.
do they get the state to fund their private school education for their children?
No, I don't think so. Not that I know of.
They're all lawyers. They make enough.
Yeah, they probably just get it, you know. But the sad thing is, like, I'm paying now for my other son $20,000 a year for assets, and I'm not getting any money from the state, but I'm still paying the taxes for public education.
Right.
So we're getting the 50,000 people that are not in the kids who aren't in the school system. Their parents are getting the double whammy.
Well, you're paying the tax.
Right.
When
John Dewey's school system.
I have a daughter in private school also, and so when I bring up the argument about, you know, I pay private school tuition and I pay for public school tuition, she doesn't use it, they always tell me, you know, it's done on a per kid basis, so since your kid isn't there, you're really not paying anything. What's your response to that I can quickly throw back at them?
Your kid's not there, so you're not really
Their
paying
funding's
anything?
determined on a per head basis. The kids, you know.
Well, someone we were talking about it earlier is even if there were no children, you're going to be paying
$1.3 billion.
That's how much the school system costs
And
without
half
any
of that
kids
goes
at
to
all.
pensions. Half of that goes to pensions.
Pensions, health, you know, debt service, facilities, you know, everything.
It's a mathematical trick.
Is
The
that
logical
weird?
trick what they're doing is like you're paying a percentage of it no matter what, and your percentage should be zero by their logic, and it isn't. It's an illogical
And even if you
argument.
homeschool, the schools count you as being in the system that they get money for.
Yeah,
Because they're homeschooled, so they're responsible for
they
you.
know who you are.
Yeah.
And they probably do it right.
But they can't do sports. They can't participate.
And what about private school? Does the public school get money for the folks that are not?
No, they say that, no, what's really strange is because I took my other son out in second grade, or first grade, whatever. It was pretty young. I didn't want to go through that again. And I kept getting mail from the DOE for years that said, you know, you're entitled to free appropriate public education. Come in, we'll evaluate your kid, etc. But he'd been in private school at my own expense. And so I called the state's enrollment office to see why he was still listed as enrolled. And they said, well, we keep him on the list, but we don't actually get money for him.
Right.
And maybe that's why all of a sudden the enrollment figures dropped, because now all of a sudden it's like 10,000 kids just disappeared
Right.
off the rolls like in a year.
They're in private school.
And we know how good they are with keeping their records.
Yeah, keeping their records.
I thought they could only get public, they could only get federal money if they filled out that FIS card that.
Right, if you fill out your federal survey card,
Yeah,
supposedly
all the time.
they get federal money for each.
That federal impact statement.
Right,
thing.
and that's a whole other thing. They get about $50 million a year for federal impact for having military here, and they use it for collective bargaining raises and things that it doesn't go to
Why
the.
doesn't the federal government pump that into schools at Schofield and Hickam?
Well, we were thinking
Take
that
care of
we tried to do a project, and Gail, we were talking about it using the Dodds money and Dodea, and there's all kinds of funds. If you put it together, you can make a voucher for military kids without any new funding.
We even found the facilities
Yeah, we found a place
for
to
the
put
school and
it.
everything else. For example, when I got here, 3 boys were going crazy in the local schools, so I had to put them all in Photo. So I tried to get the impact funds transferred to Photo, and they said absolutely not.
It's like the DOE doesn't want to lose that money.
Yeah.
They don't want to lose
Yeah.
it. And the military kids actually keep their scores higher because they do really well. They come into the system, it doesn't matter if they're black or white or whatever, and they come into the military, their scores are higher than anybody else's because they've actually had a curriculum somewhere else. And then it takes them a couple of years before they start to, you know,
Well,
lose
the
steam.
Department of Defense and the Department of State, they have schools.
Right.
And that curriculum could be imported to Hawaii, and that was a threat several years ago. And then all of a sudden that threat disappeared, and I would be suspicious that our 2 senators and our 2 congressmen
Right.
put the kibosh on that.
Yeah,
But
they
hey,
don't want to
we need
lose that money.
We need that money in Hawaii now. Don't talk about
50
bringing
million.
your State Department school teachers out. Those will be federal school teachers, and they
Yeah.
will teach on Hickam.
That's true.
None on Pearl Harbor,
But we could make them military charter schools, and it would be good enough. It would, the kids would
get what they
would
need
get what
when
they need
transfer out
because
in
they'd
3
use
years
that
to be-
Dodds curriculum at the minimum.
Yep.
You doing a DOD?
Yeah.
Okay, we tried to adopt the DOD curriculum for military students here in Hawaii in the schools we wanted to set up. Politically, we lost.
It's a political thing.
It's very political, scary.
I was looking at the DOE budget, and I was looking at the total budget for the school and the DOE, and it appears to me, and I'm really lousy in arithmetic, but but it looks to me like there's $1 billion that goes to the DOE, and there's another $1 billion that goes into the school system. Am I misreading that?
It's
I
kind
mean,
of
those aren't exact, but it's like $2 billion.
the actual.
By the way, let me just point out, we have a whole nother plate of turkey and mashed potatoes and gravy, cranberry sauce, and some
John, you can eat.
That's your
Cocoa
dinner
Puffs.
tomorrow, right
So
there.
I'm putting these out here. I
heard
encourage
that.
you
That's
to
why I
help
came.
yourself and eat more and sort of.
Well, John, the actual teacher salaries, you know, to actually pay for teachers, and this probably about 700 million that you need for the real
What I'm talking about,
classrooms.
yeah, the classroom side of the education system appears to me to be about $1 billion, including
It is.
all the administrators in the schools themselves. But then there's another over $1 billion that goes into the DOE.
Right.
If I read those things, that's
Yeah,
correct?
you are, because they do, it's kind of boring, sorry, it's called categorical programs, so they've got like 200, 300.
And we have pumpkin pie.
Oh, yeah, all right.
I'll get
They
you
get-
one.
It's got like
Well,
three.
I have, the conclusions that I drew looking at this is that, number one is they're taking about $1 billion theoretically to administer the other $1 billion.
You're right.
Is that a fair?
Yes.
Okay, now the other thing that also occurs to me is that about 98% of this administration is not really doing anything very useful because we're number 47 in all
Right.
the states. Is
There's
that-
no effectiveness.
Okay.
Right.
So
we
if,
can-
if as governor I came in and eliminated about 97% of the DOE, would you consider that?
Well, you know, there's the word we use is outsource, and if you even just outsource payroll, you'd
Yeah,
save
well,
like
exactly.
$110 million, like right off the
Oh,
bat.
no,
You-
I know that, but I'm just saying I'm looking at all those different superintendents and all the different things that they have going on. And
But it's
I'm looking at the
because-
results and it's just not there.
Well, it's like a pie. It's like categorical funding. It's like they said under weighted student formula that the schools were going to get the money was going to get, sent down to the school level. But the DOE, before they started dividing up the pie, they took 2/3,
Yeah.
and then they gave the rest to the schools.
Okay.
And
Okay,
so
I
they're
wanna
saying,
make
yeah,
sure
it's a
I'm right.
fair division of resources amongst the schools, but everyone is saying, yeah, but you're only giving us 1/3 of the pie. So that's a little
Incredible,
greedy.
yeah.
So it's
And you know offhand if the DOE is protected because of the constitutional provisions that set up the Board of Education?
yeah, the Article 10 in the Constitution is the Board of Education is actually in charge,
Yeah.
not the legislature, so
Right.
they can do whatever they want.
But-
They could actually change the whole funding system and everything.
The
Their
Board of Education.
Board of
could.
Education can do it themselves. They just don't know it.
But
They just
the-
don't know it.
But the governor, right now, through what they're doing, is able to get rid of basically forced firing of teachers and forced, diminished amounts of.
She's able to just go across the board and say, okay, all agencies get a 14% cut.
Yeah.
You guys figure it out.
So that doesn't have to go through the Board of Education.
And
So
the-
why would that not apply to the DOE?
Well, it does apply to the DOE because they're told from Georgina Kawamura at BNF, she just sends a memo, sends it over to the board, and and she said, the governor said we've all got to cut every agency 14%. So the DOE, the first thing they did is they eliminated 244 vacant positions to save $46 million. So they had funding for $46 million for people that didn't even exist. And then they eliminated that as a cost savings. Well, where's the $46 million we gave them already? You would think, okay, they cut $46 million, but they have an extra $46 million. In my mind, that's what it would be, because those people aren't there.
What I'm talking about is legal went down to Lonnie prison because it was ineffective and not using, quote unquote. But as I understand that, there's some language in the Constitution that doesn't allow her to do that with the DOE, or the governor to do that?
No, as far as shutting down a school, they've actually
No,
got...
shutting down the DOE, I'm talking.
Oh, shutting down the DOE. No,
I think that's the best thing.
yeah, I think you're right.
Well, that's what I would like to do, but yeah.
I don't think you can shut down the DOE, but you could...
Well, can you emasculate the DOE?
They try to... That's who...
It's so obvious, it seems it would be done already if you could do it, and yet...
Well, what's terrible is that, you know, you have to, the members have to pay dues. So if you have 13,000 HSTA members that are paying $1,000 a year in dues to a political agency like HSTA and NEA, that funding always gets funneled back into re-election campaigns. So, and because they're the exclusive representative in Hawaii, the only way to get rid of HSTA is for the teachers to decertify them as their exclusive rep.
No, I'm not talking about HSDA, I'm talking about the DOE.
Well,
you know.
Yeah, I mean, it is the same thing really, because that's the political structure.
No, a lot of the teachers don't like the DOE at all.
But they're forced. They pay that money. They're forced. They have no choice over what their union does with that money. And they...
Okay, well, I'll go
I don't know.
research
It's pretty bad because, like, the HSTA just changed their bylaws, and now they said the teachers don't even have to vote because they have their own committee. They said the teachers ratified the bylaws and they didn't. So now they're saying that they don't even get to vote on anything. Just hand over the money. Shut up
Another
and pay
tax,
up.
right?
Huh?
Another tax.
Yeah. And the poor teachers need it for their kids, you know, milk and tennis shoes, and they have no... The minute you join, you become a part of the HSTA.
You can't opt out of that?
You can opt out, but you still have to pay.
You pay
Oh, you
anyway.
still have to
You still have to pay. You get about $14 reduction if you opt out.
Just the
A
point.
year.
Yeah, really, yeah. Yeah.
Because they say that's all that's political, that's going to political
sure.
purposes, you know. But
How many charter schools have there?
there were 28 last time I counted. About 28. Yeah, authorized.
Now, Lynn Finnegan is pushing the charter school button real hard. You know Lynn. Lynn Finnegan is pushing the charter school button real hard. Her claim is that a charter school gets a budget, it gets funded, and the principal and the staff, they decide where the money's going.
Right.
For salaries, for this, for that.
There's some brilliant charter school principals here. Like John Thatcher in Hilo. He's amazing. He figured out how to buy his own building. He bought the school buses and then he leased them back to the DOE.
Ah,
So he wouldn't have to pay the insurance. I mean, he's like genius.
good.
And he's not certified as a principal by the DOE because he got his
Good thing.
he got his certificate or whatever from Arizona. So they consider him
Don't
like
recognize-
probationary.
He's
or
a carpetbagger,
But
right?
he's brilliant.
I heard that a lot, like, there's just something in the, I forgot what
We're
website I
definitely
seen
in
it
the
on, if
middle.
it's Hawaii Reporter or
We're
what,
not
or
too east
I
of
might
it.
have actually been searching your name and I saw this, that they withheld, like, they're withholding all this money from the DOE, or from the DOE's withholding it from the charter schools, and they aren't allowing them to access it.
There was, that was the, there was some federal funds,
Yeah, I believe that was it,
right,
allotted for
and
it.
they didn't, and that was when we had Dewey Kim, I think was the attorney, he was helping the charter schools, I'm trying to think. He went in and investigated everything to find out, you know, they were shorting him a couple $1 million, and I don't think they ever resolved it. I think they were still screaming about it. What they told the charter schools, if you let us keep all the special education money, we'll come in and do the services to your kids that have special needs. And so that amounts to about, this a while ago, it was like $5,000 per child is special ed money. And so they were saying if you get a kid in there with autism, it's going to break your budget because you're going to spend so much trying to treat them. So let us, the DOE said, let us do that. We'll do all the services, and the charter schools got talked into it, which is stupid. If they had gotten that much more money, then they could have hired whatever specialist they needed to. Because unless you're going to get a kid that's like really, you know, autism is pretty severe. I mean, if they need the one-on-one, that does cost a lot of money. But for the most part, kids with special needs in the state, it's only about 1% is like that, are like that. They're intensive needs. But kids like my kids just had a reading, we called it a teaching disorder because they needed phonics to learn how to read. So that's what Assets does, basically.
I like what you said about, like, I believe it's your daughter who went through it, and like, 'cause that's how I was in the G2 program in, 6th grade, and I was, when they tested me, I was in the top tier, and then you just go to middle school and high school in Hawaii, and I went to, probably the best public high school, and, for a while there, I almost, failed out my 9th grade year.
Oh my gosh.
And, I went from being one of the top students in the state, and my parents tried to get me in Punahou at the time, but I wasn't. Well, yeah, I wasn't into that. They should have forced me, basically.
Yeah,
now
you say that. Yeah,
and thank God HPU took me in. But
no, because you know what? Because by the time my daughter's in high school, she thought it was a fashion show. That's why she really thought school was a fashion show.
Yeah, you don't. I mean,
she kept a log every day of. She never wanted to duplicate what she wore, so every day.
That's her major.
And she ended up being a fashion marketing major. So it actually turned out good in a way. It probably, but.
She's gonna be great.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna ask like a bunch of questions.
That's okay.
What role do you see as like, for me personally, I was lucky to I have fairly good parents, in that sense where, even though they aren't super, they aren't maybe of the same pressure as, like, you have a lot of the top kids that are going to Punahou whose parents are very, sign up for programs, getting them to summer programs. My parents aren't necessarily like that, but they were still enough of a rock to keep me doing somewhat, good, I guess, keeping my head above the water.
Right.
I mean, a lot of my 3 best friends from, like, middle school, none of them graduated. I think one has a GED, the other 2 aren't. And it seems like a lot of the people that I knew, a huge portion, they barely get by, and they get past anyway because they go into the special, they go into the they have so many kids in these programs too. Normal kids without disabilities, my friends that would be put in the slower class, and I don't know what the name, I can't remember what it is, but they have them at Kaiser high school, and
resource classes.
All these kids, and they have so many kids that go on it just because it's easy. I mean, they play games.
Yeah, baby.
Right.
And
I know. I was a substitute teacher for a long time. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Is there any, a lot of it, I think, one is it takes individual responsibility, but it seems like we don't even know. A lot of the kids don't even know that because they don't take
it seriously.
No.
Well, if you look at the demographics, and like the Asian kids are the highest achievers in the public school system.
Yeah.
They are Korean, Chinese, Japanese. They excel.
Yeah.
They're doing pretty well for the most part. The kids that are at the bottom are generally Polynesian.
Yeah.
And like I said before, the Caucasian and the black kids and the Hispanic kids that come in through the military, they do pretty well.
Yeah.
Usually. So not, maybe not as high as the Asian kids, but I have a West Ed study that broke it down. So you look at, there's certain factors where you say, well, if you know that the culture is, they're going to push their kids, I'm generalizing, but,
yeah, no, I understand.
And perhaps some people, the Polynesian culture, maybe it's not as important because what's more important to them is that their family stays together. They don't want their kids moving away to the mainland. They want to,
Yeah.
So there's some probably truth to that whole cultural.
And then, my friends would be, all I need to do is pass, you know, they'll graduate, you know, and they shouldn't.
Because we don't have an exit exam.
And they don't, they don't have any sort of exam, so they pass it, and then what do they do? Well, I get a job with the union, you know.
Well, and I used to ask, I used to teach the special ed class a lot at Mililani High School, and I always say things like, so what are you guys going to do when you graduate? I opened up their portfolios. They never did one lick of work the whole year. And I'm looking at these blank pages, and I said, what are you guys going to do when you graduate? And then, we're going to work for Uncle and be a mason, and we're going to live at home the rest of our lives. Do your parents know that? You know, like, that's going to be news to them. But that's scary.
They're approaching proficiency, though.
Yeah, they're approaching. It's okay.
So what's the difference? You know?
They're there, man.
They're approaching.
But they kept moving the cut scores back so that, you know, to say whereas proficiency is here, but every year, because they have to follow that No Child Left Behind, they're moving it closer. The goalpost comes closer. So that you don't have to answer, you know, you can answer 3 questions out of 10. You're good. Wow. But in your kids, your class, I don't think that would work, right?
No, like, you gotta get 9 out of 10.
These 2 guys are in my class.
So that's not proficient, you know. But there's no grading scale anymore. There's no grades and there's no curriculum, and so it's all sort of made up. You know, that it's all subjective. And so when I got my kids evaluated, I went to an independent. Some people from California came in, you know, tested them, found out exactly what in an objective assessments you can do, Woodcock-Johnson, or all these different things that will show you where your child is functioning. And boy, they said, my little one, they said, oh, he's fine. And I said, well, these are all zeros. And they said, oh, we don't average in the zeros.
You're
kidding.
No.
The zeros don't count at all.
Zeros don't count. So the recommendation,
He's an ace.
he was 6. He was 6, and the recommendation was just have him read the newspaper.